Morning. It's time for lesson 3. The emergence of the genus Homo. We're going to get into things like brains, tools, fire, and other technologies that made us who we are today. So thanks for joining us. This has been quite the journey, creating these notes. It's a lot of fun, you know, empty classes, just making notes.
We're people too. It's not empty.
It's empty. We've seen this before. We're done with the red guys. We're done with the purple guys, and then we're into the blue. Starting off with Homo habilis. I got hair in my face here. I'm gonna take this off. Yeah. Good. So, the thing about brains is that they got a lot bigger, especially right when the genus Homo emerged, which is one of the biggest reasons for calling it a brand new genus and not just a new species. There is another thing with that as well. But the thing about brains, again, we've talked about this before, it's traceable. Every species seems to get a little bit bigger in terms of cranial capacity, but as soon as Homo habilis came to town, things changed drastically, and there's a big reason for that. So with specifically the early genus Homo, we see a massive gain in size. And this is something you may not know, is that your brain is very light in terms of weight. It takes up about 2% of your weight, but it consumes a whole lot of energy, up to 20% of your body's energy. So if you have a larger brain, you need to consume more calories. That's basically how it works. If your brain is smaller, then you don't. So as brains continue to get larger, the consumption had to get larger as well. Okay? So we have basically from here on in, just like what we watched with chimpanzee, just basically picking things up and eating constantly to fuel our smaller bodies and smaller brains. So to get big brains, you needed protein. How did that happen? I'm not sure any of us would be able to chase down a deer. We're still not at the top of the food chain. So things like hunting had to get there, because where you get protein is generally in meat, and at this point we're not eating a lot of meat. Okay? So basically the short way around this is that another thing that we had a new genus here is they came with tools, and this is the first time we saw tools. Basically the first time we saw anything kind of deemed cultural. They were pretty bad tools, but still they were effective. They were planned things, and they helped them get something else. Okay, that's kind of the definition of a tool. So these bigger brains kind of gave us the ideas to make tools, and those tools were able to help us get meat a little bit better, which in turn gave us more energy, and also kind of along the way you get brains. It's kind of like tying your shoes, right? If you're not good at it the first day you do it, but over your lifetime you get a lot better, and sooner or later you're really, really good at it and much more efficient. So that's kind of the way tools work over the generations, and this teaching that happens, and just by fooling around with rocks, you're able to kind of come up with some decent ideas and then replicate it later on. Okay? So if we look at some of the tools, they're pretty terrible. So the first one we'll talk about is Homo habilis, around 2 million years old. Okay, and basically a brand new genus, partly because of the brain size, but more importantly because it's the first time we ever saw a tool. Okay? Gosh, are they beautiful. I don't know, it was, I guess, popular to have mullet heads back then.
Mr. Francis, could you please reenact this photo?
This one?
Yeah, I was... Yeah, the guy in the back is what I was looking
Well,
for.
I've got, okay.
He,
I think he's the head guy, the leader. That's the leader stance. And these guys are maybe coming up, trying to steal their food, but that's why he's taking the leader stance there.
thank you.
So we have, I know I have a different age here, don't worry about the age, I would keep it with the other ones, different ranges here. So the size here of the brain cranial capacity is getting a lot bigger. The last time we saw was still in the 500s, so this is a huge progression, and very much smoother head, so the cranium is starting to round out. The brow ridge, your kind of big bulky brow ridge is not as big. So again, brains are starting to explode here. And when we talked about the dental arcade, kind of the inside of your maxilla, it's now starting to kind of round out, okay? So the assumption is that they used tools because they were found close to them. So that has to be the connection. Were they the first? There's a lot of debates, a lot of question marks, but in a lot of people's minds, Homo habilis is likely the first species to use a tool. Okay? So here we are, starting off the blue guys, Homo habilis. This was the first tool. So this is the same tool, just at 3 different vantage points. If I were to walk past this, I would call it a rock, okay? But just to understand the primitive aspect of this, this is kind of like, you're not chasing after a deer, trying to, chop its head off with that. You are probably, like the mullet head guys there, you probably allowed a predator to kill something, and then as a group you probably chased it away. And this kind of hand axe type thing, it's got a rounded end, and you would be able to chop things off, or kind of harvest stuff, or chop down bigger sticks that you can't break with your hand and stuff. So I do want you to know Oldowan tools, and again the association is with Homo habilis. Okay. Once we get to Homo erectus, probably one of the biggest and most successful species, just because of the time frame. They were the first ones that kind of got out of Africa, which is a massive, massive step. You find evidence of Homo erectus in China. Indonesia, not so much. It's going to be a kind of a little mini version of Homo erectus. So we're getting up to big brain size, almost comparable to ours. Maybe that's why they lasted for about 2 million years. And they got into kind of more specializing tools, like more kind of actual things that look like they could hurt you and do some damage in terms of hunting. So just imagine putting this on a big stick and throwing it at something, or being able to cut kind of fur off or whatever, right? So with that said, we call it the Mobius line, basically where tools are found, so Acheulean tools, and again, nothing is happening up here yet, and as we progress, the tools get better and better as time goes on, okay? So Acheulean tools, I'll finish this one off with this. This is the same thing 4 times, just at different vantage points. The big thing about Acheulean tools or Oldowan tools is that they're bifacial, which means they're worked on both sides. It's a planned thing. This is not just someone throwing a rock on the ground. This is someone sitting down and purposely creating things. Okay? So there we go. Bifacial.